My name is Jacob Bernard, and I am a freshman from the class of 2023 in the Walsh School of Foreign Service, and I am studying international history. I'm originally from South Jersey, and since arriving at Georgetown, I have joined the Georgetown College Democrats, and I have been a campaign manager for 2 campus elections and was recently elected PR coordinator of Harbin Hall Council. In addition, one of my favorite classes that I've been attending on campus has been environmental policy with Professor Fiesler, so very relevant to the topic today. I'm honored to introduce Marianne Williamson. Marianne Williamson is an internationally acclaimed lecturer, activist, and author of 4 #1 New York Times best-selling books. 7 of her 12 books have been published in the New York Times bestsellers, and Marianne has been a popular guest on programs such as Oprah, Good Morning America, and Bill Maher. In 1989, she founded Project Angel Food, a Meals on Wheels program that serves homebound people with AIDS in Los Angeles area. And now time for some big truth. Please join me in welcoming Marianne Williamson to the stage.
Thank you, darling. Thank you so much. Thank you. Hi, how are you?
Marianne, always a pleasure to see you. Thank you for being with us.
It's great to see you, too. Thank you. Thank you.
So much of your campaign has been based around social justice.
Yes.
Right? So to a lot of the students this morning, and I'm sure through the rest of the day, they're asking the candidates how climate change and mitigating it is also a social justice issue. That's sort of upside down for you, because you start with the idea that we need social justice and that climate change contributes to that injustice. Tell us a bit about your thinking about how you frame climate change and the issue that it is.
I think in many ways when we talk about climate change, we're talking about trees, but we want to step back here and look at the forest. Our biggest problem when it comes to the issue of climate change is a psychological one, and that is a massive state of denial, not only among Americans, but among many people in the world. Not so much among young people, but among a lot of people. It's a massive state of denial based on the fact that if you look at the truth squarely in the eye, what stands in front of us, if we do not make massive change, is a level of global catastrophe unseen in the modern era. We are talking about refugee crises, massive starvation, food shortages, social collapse on a level that could literally be civilization threatening. So the first thing we have to do is deal with people's need to psychologically and emotionally integrate that understanding in such a way that instead of contracting, instead of constricting, instead of denying, people's hearts are open to the level of effort that we must make, which is World War II mass mobilization that it will take to lead us through this turbulent period of time to the other side of it.
So part of our problem in this country is that so much of our prosperity and our wealth, including since World War II, has been the engagement in things that have contributed to this, right? We have industrialized, we made more cars than anyone did, we took more oil out of the ground and more coal out of the ground, and we have associated this fossil fuel industry that we live in with prosperity.
Well, not everyone has, but hold on just a moment. There was a time when that was true. And there was a time during which there was ignorance about the dangers. And there was a time when absolutely we couldn't have fought World War II without it. But it was back in 1976 that Jimmy Carter first put solar panels on the top of the White House. He put solar panels on the top of the White House, for some of you who might not remember 1976. He did, and he talked about greening the economy. And then in 1980, Ronald Reagan became president, and pretty much his first act was to remove those solar panels. So we did know. There was a time, you know, in life, many times in life, Ali, in our personal lives as well as in a culture, what was appropriate at one time is simply not appropriate in the next season. So if we had listened to Jimmy Carter, if we had started at the time when people started to understand we should be heading on this track, but what we got, of course, was obstruction from fossil fuel companies, et cetera. Now, there is a term, intersectionality, which we use, and intersectionality is a very appropriate term for this time because it applies to everything, not only the bad stuff, but also the good stuff. So really we have to talk about the very nature of capitalism itself. Now, I'm not anti-capitalist, I'm for capitalism with a conscience. But what started happening in 1980 is a virulent strain of capitalism. It is a virulent strain of capitalism that puts short-term shareholder profit before all else, before the safety and welfare of the workers, before the safety and the well-being of the environment, the community, etc. And it justified its failure to listen. It justified its failure to even be open to a conversation about what this was doing to the planet. So as long as you had that virulent strain of capitalism, which is an amoral system, the issue here is not that we have an economic system that is immoral, but we have an economic system that is amoral. And an amoral economic system leads to immoral consequences.
Amoral insofar as it does not calculate morality into its outcome.
They weren't sitting there saying, how are we going to screw the people? How are we going to kill indigenous cultures? How are we going to mess with the Amazon? No, that's not what they did. It's not like that. It's that we feel justified in not even considering those things. Moral, ethical considerations, that's not our job. Our job is short-term profit for the shareholders. With complete blinders on, don't talk to me about any other stakeholders. That is a virulent form of capitalism.
But it is the one that makes people a lot of money in this world.
Well, a very small amount of people are made money by that, and a very large, massive group of people suffer because of that. And that's why we need a revolution in our times. So, and that alone, Allie, that alone would not, a peaceful, nonviolent revolution, peaceful, nonviolent political revolution. Now, when this all started happening, if capitalism had been kept in its lane, it couldn't have done so much damage. But what happened, first of all, that was in 1980. By the 1990s, the extraordinary undue influence of that corporate money on our government, that's when you really started talking about toxic pathological brew here. That not only was this virulent form of capitalism getting hold of our economic system, but then it corrupted our government, and then ultimately ended up hijacking our entire moral value system. So that's the problem that we have, that our government, instead of serving the people, of the people, by the people, for the people, which would include, hey, people, can you breathe? Hey, people, do you think your kids will be able to breathe? Hey, people, do you think you'll have food? Instead of that, it was of these multinational corporations, by these multinational corporations, for these multinational corporations, to the point where not only on the issue of climate, but on the issue of many things, we are facing a whole system ecological shutdown and breakdown. And these stress points, once again, it's not just climate. It's on so many levels where the stress points are so great that if we do not have a fundamental pattern disruption at this time, and I mean at this time, I don't mean, yeah, we really should think about that. And I don't mean we should have a plan to talk about it. I mean at this time. If we do not have a fundamental pattern disruption at this time, you know what it's like? It's like when you know someone who has, you know that they drink too much, you know that they take too many drugs. You know that. But then many of us have had the experience, because unfortunately this experience is too prevalent in American society, where somebody has called you or you've called someone else. We all know that moment. Friends and family and loved ones get it in their gut at the same time. Somebody says to somebody, did you see her at the party last night? And you say, yeah, I saw her. And you say, you think we ought to do something? And you say, I think it's time. I don't know an interventionist. Do you know an interventionist? You say, I know somebody who knows somebody out in California. We all know that there's that moment, because when it comes to the physical body, we all know there's a limit past which, whether it's drugs, alcohol, or other behavioral patterns as well, the body will simply no longer tolerate the behavior. It will no longer be habitable. The same with the planet. The same with the planet. It will just take so much, and it will then no longer be habitable. And that is how species evolve. Species evolve in a way that if the behavioral patterns become maladaptive for the survival of the species, it will either evolve in another direction or it will go extinct. So when it comes to our behavioral patterns towards the planet, they have been dysfunctional for a long time. They have now moved into malfunctional.
So
we've gone from dysfunction to malfunction. We need an intervention, and we need it now.
So you come from Texas. There are people in Texas, in Oklahoma, in North Dakota, in Louisiana, who hear all of this talk and get very fearful about their own economic situation and their own what a transformation would look like. You spend a lot of time, more so than a lot of candidates, on thinking about how people feel and how people react to things. And there are some people who, you said, stiffen up when they have this conversation. Maybe they're not really climate deniers, but they're worried about the impact of all of this talk about massive, immediate transformation and peaceful revolution on their lives and prosperity. As president, Marianne Williamson, what would you say to those people who say, I am only going to lose when someone decides to aggressively fight climate change?
First of all, I think that's patronizing, condescending, and insulting towards a lot of people. You know, I do come from Texas. And one of the things coming from Texas has given me is not only a familiarity with the oil industry, but it's also given me a mentality that we can do great things. We can do big things. And Americans are hardwired for big things. What Americans are not hardwired for is all this incremental change. It makes people's eyes glass over. So I have had a 35-year career working with people who's up close and personal with people whose lives were in crisis. And part of the problem I have with the conventional political system, and what I see in politicians all the time, they're telling the truth. But when you go to a court of law and you raise your hand, your oath is to not just tell the truth. Your oath is to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. Now, if I go to a doctor, I need the doctor to be honest with me. Tell me if the test results say cancer, I need you to tell me, because then I'll get very serious and all kinds of intelligence will emerge from within me because I'm listening to you really, really closely, and we will talk about healing options. What our politicians do is, too many of them are told by operatives, don't tell anybody how really bad it is because that'll sound negative and it'll depress people and make them not want to vote for you. So they tell the truth but not the whole truth. I want to tell the American people, it's as bad as you fear. It's as bad as you fear. And we are going to get through this because we're American. And we are going to have a season of repair. And we are going to mobilize. And it's not during World War II. It wasn't Democrats versus Republicans, left versus right. We are all Americans. And we are going to mobilize. And I'm going to ask all of you, maybe not all of you, but I would like to ask your opinion. I think during this season of repair, we should have a mandatory national service 1 year for people between 18 and 26 because we need you. We need to fix this climate. We need to fix this country.
Put up your hand if you like the idea of national service to save the climate.
To save the country. It's not just the climate.
Right,
it's a season of repair. We cannot look at the kind of social breakdown that we are facing if we do not make a fundamental pattern disruption. It is unwise of us, even foolish, deeply naive of us, to think that we can just incremental change our way to the kind of economic, social, and political transformation that we need in this country.
So you're talking about something interesting here, an inspirational message of big thinking that is uniquely American in character, to be able to say, hey, we got a problem. We've identified it. Now we move forward to fix it. In terms of trying to figure out what you would actually do, let's spell that out. What models have you looked at that you like? How would you deal with this as president? And what priority would it get in a Marianne Williamson presidency?
Well, first of all, it has to get top priority. We have no choice. It's like if the test results come back, you know, it's like I saw a movie once where, you know, I think it was a Tom Hanks movie, and the doctor said, you have cancer. He says, I don't have time for that. Well, sorry, you're just going to have to rearrange your schedule. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
So, but at the same time, climate change is connected to so many other issues, and the president has to be able to hold the whole picture. But you cannot in any way peripheralize the issue of climate change. We need to be thinking about climate change reversal, remember. So we all know what needs to happen. We all know we need to go carbon neutral. We need to decarbonize. We need to go at 100%, certainly by 2040, 70% by 2030. Let's rush it even faster if we we can't. We know we have to sequester the carbon. We know we have to reforest. We know we have to develop different forms of natural power and energy for transportation. We know basically the things we need to do, and we know that we need to do with the animal factory farming because of the nitrous oxide and the methane. Now, there are different kinds of ways that we can go about this or that. But the issue is, none of that will be possible if we do not have a cultural, spiritual, and moral buy-in from the American people. I don't want to be a president who goes to Washington and I'm going to fight for you. I want to go to Washington and be a grown-up Greta Thunberg. That's what I want to do. I want to be a president who exhibits something which we have not seen for a while in the United States, and that is a president with moral influence. A president whose policies and consciousness are aligned with the highest ideals of democracy and the highest ideals of humanitarian concern.
So there are a lot of times in debates, in these debates and discussions, where you have brought up spirituality and sort of nature in the way to solve things, and people have sometimes taken issue with that. This is an interesting one because there are a lot of people of belief, of faith in this world who think that climate change, climate and the preservation of the earth is actually central to humanity, and perhaps that should drive people's thinking. At least if you are a person of faith.
Absolutely, of course. And I believe that we need a politics of conscience. But it's very difficult for politicians who have not aligned policies with conscience in the past to then pull out the conscience card. People have never talked about moral concern before. All of a sudden they're saying the president is immoral, but I haven't been listening to you talk about moral concern. And that is why we need to recognize moral and ethical concern as not only the essence of a well-lived personal life, but it is also should be the driving force of all policy. And this is true economically as well. And I think that this is part of the argument that we are to give to the great capitalist chieftains of our time. We're living in a very pregnant moment. You have people, I think you and I actually talked about this on your show before. You have people like Jeremy Grantham, people like Ray Dalio, the Business Roundtable that put out its statement recently that short-term profits should not be the only driving principle. I believe that with a president who makes the moral claim that we will not be able to pull this off if it's all oppositional. We could not have fought World War II. We could not have come out of the Great Depression if it had been this group versus that group. These are moral concerns about which we can all agree. So if we just have a climate crisis plan and we just try to impose it on people, because this is what I find very odd about so many of my fellow candidates talking about their plan. Their plan is talked about in a vacuum, as though on January 21st, 2021, the fossil fuel forces will not be just coming at us. They will be coming at us. So we have to have made a moral argument that is so great and talks to all sectors of our society in such a way that there is a buy-in. And that is the skill set that I feel I bring to the table. If we do not have a buy-in, an emotional and spiritual and psychological buy-in from the American people, then the massive kind of mobilization that is necessary here, I don't see it happening.
So I can see how you can compel people on that side to get the buy-in. But the other point you just made is on January 1st, 2020, the fossil fuel industry, 2021, thank you. The fossil fuel industry is going to come at anybody who becomes president of the United States who has declared that climate change is issue number one or very close to it. Well, that's the question. How do you fend that off? Because that is, as you have correctly identified, corporate America in general and the fossil fuel industry in specific is one of the most powerful forces in politics in America in 2019.
I think people constrict when they feel attacked. Many capitalist moguls feel attacked by progressives, by the left. They feel made wrong. They feel disrespected. And in me, they have someone who has experienced the high side of American capitalism. The free market has been very good to me. The problem in America, as I see it, is not that some people can get rich here. The problem is that not enough people can get rich here. That's the problem. So I come from a place of saying, I need your skills. I need you to not only allow it, I need you to help lead it. You know all that industrial scale harm that's been done? I need industrial scale repair. And your infrastructure and your research and development and your manufacturing and your infrastructure, I'm not asking you to step aside. I'm asking you to join with me. I'm asking you to join with me as a patriotic American. I do not, because what you said before, Ali, was true. Much of that product, including oil and gas, there was a time when it was appropriate, but we're simply living at a different time. We are entering a new era, and it is a fundamentally different era. President Obama was the last American president dealing with the effects of the 20th century. We are now in a different time. We're in a different century. The consequences of failure are unlike anything we've ever seen before. The consequences of failure are the possibility of global catastrophes on a level we have never seen before. When you talk to people, you know, Martin Luther King Jr. said, you have very little morally persuasive power with people who can feel your underlying contempt. And I think that many of those guys feel this contempt. I don't have, like you said, I grew up in Texas. I grew up with you. I went to high school with you, remember? You know what I'm saying? But your taxes are too low and you know it. And you know what they say to me when I say it? I know. Because I know you. Stop pretending.
But in the end, they have not taken their industrial level expertise, which we may have to need to, we may have to depend on. You are suggesting, whether you do it nicely or not, they're going to feel attacked, right? You have supported the Green New Deal, which means no dependence on fossil fuels after 2050. That puts these companies, as they are today, essentially out of business.
No, it doesn't. It's an invitation. There is more money to be made. And that can be proven even right now. There is more money to be made in green energy. There is more money to be made in green jobs. And there's also a survivable future that is possible. So that's just a canard. This idea that it's economic loss. Let me tell you something. Global catastrophe will be bad for everybody's economy. So people are intelligent enough that I believe, and I think that part of the problem with the progressive argument sometimes is that we don't go far enough and just say it the way it is. This is not an option. It wasn't an option whether or not we fought the Nazis. It wasn't an option. This is not an option. And America should not only go along with this, America should be leading this. Americans are hardwired for great things. And that's part of this whole Texas thing. I come from a place where we do things big. Americans do things big. We are not hardwired for incremental change. We're like a big airplane. If you see a big airplane in the sky, it's like this amazing thing. But if you see it on the runway, it's kind of this huge clunky piece of metal. If you see this amazing sports car on the highway, it's like, whoa. But if you see it just like in a neighborhood driving around, it's just a car. So Americans, we're like the big airplane. So I want to initiate a phase of repair, an era of repair, a mass mobilization to repair this country. And you can't separate climate change from the fact that millions of American children live with chronic trauma. You can't separate climate change from the fact that our national security agenda is driven more by short-term profits for defense contractors than it is by any kind of effort to actually proactively wage peace. It's like choose your poison. All of these things will kill us if we allow ourselves to just acquiesce to this pattern by which we continue to move along the road we're on. And that's why, for me, in this campaign, the fact, for instance, we're not talking about the military, we're not talking about the military-industrial complex. If you want to talk about some of the efforts at climate change, if you want to talk about not only some of the fossil fuel use, not only in terms of equipment, but in terms of the very wars that we're fighting, is part of the craziness because of the influence of oil. So we need a holistic vision of what is wrong, and we need a holistic vision of what is necessary. We need a holistic vision that involves how people feel, how people think, what it takes to morally persuade people. That's why I'm running, and that's why I think I could get the job done.
So who do you reach out to immediately when you become president
Well, I think
to get this
gonna,
done?
I think there's probably going to be a big argument between 49 states and Washington State. It's going to be, we want Jay Inslee. No, we want Jay Inslee. No, we want Jay Inslee. So Jay Inslee's probably going to have a big decision to make,
calls,
right?
yeah.
There's going to be a lot of phone calls. We have, one of the things that I've seen in my campaign, not only in the area of environment, but in the area of so many things, we have the geniuses here. We have the best practices here. We have the projects here. We have the people. What we need right now, as everybody here knows, our EPA is headed by an ex-chemical company executive. Before that, an ex-oil company executive. We need our EPA to be headed by a world-class environmentalist. Right? We need everybody who works at the EPA. We need our EPA to be a magnet for world-class environmentalists. This country does not lack problem solvers. The issue is the problem creators get the money. We have a political system which does more to advocate for the financial benefit of those who cause the problems and just throw a bone every once in a while towards the people who know how to create the solutions.
So you have pointed toward California
Yes.
as an example of how you think the country should move. Obviously, we're right in the midst of the federal government changing the waiver situation. California has for 50 years operated under waivers that have allowed them to have cars sold there that are manufactured to a higher emission standard than the rest of the country. And the President of the United States has decided that is no longer valid. What California does on emissions and on climate is now being reversed, or at least there's an effort to have that done.
I think California will put up a fight, and I'm all with them.
How would you?
They're not going to take that. I've lived most of my adult life in California. They're not going to take that line down.
So tell me about how that has succeeded, because the argument against that level of work to fight climate has been that it's not economically viable. Obviously, California has proved that that's not true.
Right.
We have changed the way cars are made because of these waivers
That's exactly right.
that California had.
Right. We need to call a lie a lie. So what has been the problem, and this is, the Democratic Party has to become the Democratic Party again. The Democratic Party has to be the Democratic Party that I grew up with, where there was not all this moral equivocation. You can't say we really want to help. What the Democratic Party has done too often. So you've got a Republican Party, too many members of which see all this hideous destruction of people and planet just so that a few people can get rich. And their view for many of them is, yeah, what of it? Democrats, not everyone, these are not monoliths, but too many members of the Democratic Party, for my taste, have seen all the suffering that it creates, wants to ameliorate the suffering on the periphery, but are not willing to challenge the underlying forces that make all that suffering inevitable. And they won't, because they're taking the money too. So you're either taking money from petroleum companies, you're taking money from oil and gas, you're taking money from chemicals, or you can stand up with moral authority and say this shit's got to stop.
You mentioned the EPA. There are, you know, the EPA has been one agency that has dealt with climate change. You've got the Department of Energy that deals with it in some cases. The Department of Defense does actually take this more seriously than this administration seems to. How do you bring this all together? Does this become, how do you make this an all-of-government solution for America as opposed to fixing the EPA from being damaged as it has been under this administration?
I'm not sure I totally understand.
Is there a climate czar in your future? Is there?
Well, to me, that's partly what the EPA should be. But remember, part of what we have, look at something like what agribusiness has done to farming. That's part of the problem, because we need regenerative agriculture to sequester the carbon. So this is what I was talking about with intersectionality. You know, at this point, we can't say we're going to deal with this but not deal with that. We have to deal with the contaminants in our water. We have to deal with the carcinogens in our food. We have to talk about the toxins in our air. It's all part of the same thing. But the main thing you need is a president who has the holistic view. and a president who understands how everything connects to everything. Now, I do believe there are two areas in my campaign where I do feel we need specific coordinative bodies. That has to do with children and the unbelievable chronic trauma of millions of children. That's why I want a Department of Children and Youth. And also peace, why we have to deal, I believe we need a Department of Peace, because right now our national security agenda, as I said, is more driven by defense profits and more, it's driven by endless preparation for war, as though that will somehow end up with peace. But the truth is, war is the absence of peace. Peace is not the absence of war. We need to proactively cultivate peace. In terms of the climate, theoretically, in terms of infrastructure and the way the government is organized, if you have the EPA being what the EPA should do, I think let's start there. Let's start there. Let's start by bringing in the world-class environmental scientists to the EPA, making the EPA everything it should be. Then if those guys and women and men, come to me and say, we think that we should actually build a larger coordinative body around this, then I'm open to that. But I say let's start with what we have.
So there's some who've looked at your plans and say, you're on the right side of the argument, but those kinds of specificities about where you'd go haven't been fully fleshed out. Are you prepared
to give me an example?
Do that work of how you would describe that, what that roadmap would be? Because there are some who argue maybe January 21st, 2021 is too late to decide whether or not you need to do something more than figuring out whether the right people are populating the EPA and whether it has enough authority in government, because that authority has been eroded over the last several years.
All right, so you're saying, which is it, Williamson? Make a choice. I say let's start with the EPA as it is.
All right, very good. Let's go to questions. We have a question on the balcony.
Hi, my name's Alex. I'm a senior here at Georgetown, an economics major. My question for you is, how will you take on special interest groups who, through donations and lobbying, prevent climate action in Congress?
Would you please repeat that?
Yes, how would you take on special interests and lobbying groups who, by their actions, prevent action in Congress?
Oil and gas last year lobbied Congress to the tune of $125 million. Big Pharma to the tune of $284 million.
Billion, right?
Million. This is, did I say billion? I meant million.
Yeah.
This is how corrupt our government is. And I think that we should all recognize that a lot of that money goes to Democrats as well as Republicans. This is time for the American people. You know, it's interesting because life is not just about what happens to you. It's about who you choose to be in the space of what happens to you. I feel so often when I'm talking to younger people, I think this is part of what happens as you get older. You become the keepers of the story. And I come from a generation who did not put up with this, with the Vietnam War. And it's so beautiful to see how young people are now around climate. Young people around climate today are very similar to how we were about the Vietnam War. And it's a very good sign, because the way the American people have been acquiescing to our own disempowerment has been part of the sickness. Donald Trump is an opportunistic infection. He could never have gotten hold of us had there not been... He could never have gotten hold of us had there not been a weakened societal immune system. And that is too many people chronically politically disengaged. The political system has played us like poker chips. We've become spectators, and we've allowed it. So how can it be that you are going to weigh in every 4 years, maybe every 2 years, when corporate lobbyists are weighing in every hour? Highly paid corporate lobbyists, including fossil fuel, are visiting these people's office every single hour of every day that they're there. So but there's only one thing that can override that, and that is enough of us who rise up and remember the Declaration of Independence. Because everybody talks about all men are created equal. That's a big one. God gave all men inalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Also a big one, particularly since you can't pursue happiness if you can't breathe. But I like 3 and 4 also, Allie. Number 3 is the governments are instituted to secure those rights. And number 4, it is the right of the people to alter that government or abolish it if it's not doing its job.
So what does that look like? Because what you have identified is the heart of so many issues in this country, right? Lobbyists who spend billions of dollars and all of their time dealing with our lawmakers.
Right.
What would you do to fix it?
It's what all of us will do. It's called voting, number one. It's called citizenship, becoming a dimension of what you think of as a well-lived life. It's getting over this notion, you know, if you don't take care of your marriage, how can you be surprised if you start to lose your marriage? If you don't take care of your body, why should you be surprised if you start losing your health? If you don't take care of your business, don't go being surprised if you lose your business. And if you don't take care of your democracy, when the founders put it in our hands, and the politicians work for you, but what business is going to work if you're not overseeing your employees? So all of these things can be overridden by one thing, and that is an awakening of the American people. We have a political system now which actually thrives on your not being too awakened. It thrives. That's why I'm running. It's like, this has got to stop. The whole thing's dysfunctional because the American people have got to rise up. It's called, first of all, it's called voting. But before you vote, I think one of the reasons, you know, even in defeating the president in 2020, it's not just about the people who are so into Trump. And it's not just about the people who, no matter what, are going to vote for the Democrat. We have to think about the millions of people who didn't vote. We have to think about the millions of people who voted for third party. I don't think that was millions, and we need to think about what I believe are millions of people who voted for him but are at least disturbed. But those people need to be compelled by a vision different than the vision that is being offered now. And that is a vision where we don't just tell the truth, we tell the whole truth and nothing but the truth. Our system is so corrupt that the system, to look to the political system as it exists now, thinking it's going to repair itself, is naive at best and absurdly foolish at worst. Because the American government didn't wake up one day and say, let's end slavery, shall we? No, it was the people. The abolitionist movement meant the people rose up and the people stepped in. The US government didn't wake up one day and say, let us give women the right to vote. No, that's not what happened. With the women's suffragette movement, the people rose up and the people stepped in. And with the civil rights movement, the US government didn't wake up and say, oh, let us desegregate the South and end institutionalized white supremacy. No, with Dr. King and the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, it was the people who rose up and the people stepped in. And what is going on now, I challenge the idea that only people whose careers have been entrenched for decades in the limitations of the mindset that drove us into this ditch are qualified to lead us out of this ditch. It is time, just as it was in time in the situations I mentioned before, just as it was time in 1776 for the people to rise up and for the people to step in.
Right. Let's go to Iowa State University in that monitor.
My name is Victoria Demarest. I'm a junior in biology. I'm currently here with my Women in Politics class. And so my question is, one of your prerogatives for combating climate change is to use hydrogen in all aircrafts by 2035. And how are you planning to convince the American people that the inherent danger that comes with using hydrogen as fuel is worth the risk? And how do you propose funding the added need to train personnel, transport, and regulate the material?
We're hearing aids.
It was just talking about hydrogen as fuel, and how do you talk to people about the risks of hydrogen as fuel? How would you address that?
The risks in terms of safety?
Yeah.
Well, I think obviously we have to balance safety with everything else that we need to do. But this is one more area where I feel we talk about the power of the wind, and we talk about the power of the tides, and we talk about the power of the sun. We talk about the powers in the earth. We need to talk about the power of the human brain, which I think is the greatest fuel for our success in the 21st century. And so I don't buy that we're going to have to make a choice between climate reversal and safety. I don't buy it. I think that we can have them both.
All right, very good. Over here.
My name's Ananya Murthlingam. I'm a freshman in the college here. I just wanted to thank you all for coming today and for organizing this forum. It's really nice.
And thank you all for coming and being at this forum. We can organize forums every day, all the time. You have to participate, and we appreciate that. Big round of applause to all of you who have participated in this.
So my question was regarding your policy on rebuilding fisheries. I know you're interested in doing that, but how do you plan on doing this? And then also, what about sustainable fishing? And then what is your take on GMOs and agriculture affecting climate change?
Excellent question. All right, we're talking about fisheries, about rebuilding fisheries. How would you do that? And what is your take on GMO and agriculture?
No GMOs. GMOs should be labeled at the very, very least. Every other country is protecting its people. Why aren't we protecting our people? I feel, so no, and no to fracking and no to nuclear. We have to understand what's at stake here. I think the American people have not been asked, you know, there's a difference between the word renounce and sacrifice. To sacrifice is to give something up. To renounce is to choose the lower in order to gain the higher. And so I believe that when it comes to many of those things, that we simply say no.
Now, do you have a thought on fisheries?
Only I know about the phytoplankton, and I know about the fact that the ecosystem in the ocean is as important as every other aspect of this, and that we must take by all means, do that which needs to be done in order to clean up the oceans and to clean up the fisheries.
All right, let's go.
And the runoff, and I know about the runoff, and I know what the runoff is doing to poison the fish, and it must stop.
Let's go to the University of Southern California.
Hi, Marianne. Hi, Ali. Thank you for taking my question. My name is Chase Beach. I'm a graduate student here at the University of Southern California. My question is about rising sea levels and the coastline. In California and across the country, sea levels are rising at an alarming rate. My question for you, Marianne, is do you support managed retreat from the coastline, or do you support building more seawalls to protect communities that are living on these coasts across the country, and particularly in California, where we are?
Well, more seawalls, absolutely. I mean, that goes without saying. We must have more seawalls. In terms of mandatory retreat, you know, mandatory is a tough word for me. I think it's a tough word. I don't think there's something, you know, what has happened is we've gone from rugged individualism to rugged narcissism. And that's the problem. We all need to have more of a sense of collective need. Wherever we can, let's enroll people in doing the right thing, right? If we go into all this like, that's why I feel that if we just start imposing plans on people, then you're going to get a blowback, and you're going to get a blowback. Then you're going to have they're going to be back in 22, even if the Democrat wins in 20, which Democrat will win in 20. Okay, if the Democrat wins in 20 and we just start imposing things, those forces will have an easier time coming back in 22 and coming back in 24. And that's why I believe that someone who can inspire the kind of cultural and moral revolution that is necessary so that we all feel we're in this together and people will want to do the things that are necessary. So I would like to take steps before mandatory retreat. Also, I believe a lot of that, Ali, should come. I don't like the idea of Washington telling San Luis Obispo. The environmentalists in California know more about how to handle things on the California coastline than Washington does. So this is an area where there's environmentalists in Iowa know about floods in Iowa. Environmentalists in California know about the coastline, and they know about fires in California. I have a lot of respect for that because I've seen what happens when that power is inverted.
So I'm curious, because you and I have spoken a number of times, and I think the way you think about how you change people's minds is very appealing. You used the term a moment ago, enroll people. Mm-hmm. There are people in this country who think we might be past enrollment. We, like the rest of the country, people go into their corners, and do you just think that your good spirit is going to convince people to do the right thing?
No, don't get me wrong. And if you look at my climate plans on Marianne 2020, no, we need a massive enrollment. This is what Franklin Roosevelt did. So Franklin Roosevelt, at the beginning of World War II, he brought in all the automakers from Detroit.
Right.
And he said, gentlemen, I need your help. He said, I need this many ships, I need this many planes, and I need this many tanks. And I need you to help me. Mm-hmm. And they said, oh, Mr. President, we're patriotic Americans, we'd love to help you. So as soon as we got all these cars made, we'd love to do that. President Roosevelt said, gentlemen, I don't think you understand me. I need this many ships, I need this many tanks, and I need this many planes. You will not be making cars until this is done. So I'm not saying, I'm not a Republican, right? Like, come on, remember who I am. I'm a real lefty. So what I'm saying here, is I'm going to give you a chance. I'm going to give you a little bit of time. So here's a carrot, but I got a stick in my pocket.
All right.
I'm just going to give you some time, want to be magnanimous, want this to all be friendly, but I'm watching the clock. And if you don't come up with a plan, we'll come up with a plan for you.
We'll go over to the balcony now.
Good afternoon, Ms. Williamson, and thank you for taking my question. My name's Jack McNally. I'm a senior here studying government, and my question to you is, in your remarks, we said that we need a revolution to deal with the climate crisis. What does that revolution look like, and how do we convince Americans working to put food on the table in industries that depend on fossil fuels to join us in that revolution?
Okay, so you said we need a revolution. Jeff would like to know what the revolution looks like, and how do you convince Americans who are working hard to put food on the table, who come from those communities that depend on fossil fuel production, that they need to be part of that, and how they will?
First of all, it's a revolution in consciousness. It's a revolution inside us. You know, our mistake is that we thought that the American Revolution was a done deal. We thought you could just set yourself up as a democracy and consider it done. We now realize, or at least a lot of us realize, that was a mistake. The American Revolution is sustained by many revolutions as we go through time. There have been times when we've had to course correct. There have been times where we've gone way off the rails of the spirit of the American Revolution, or in some cases, such as slavery, we never were on the rails in terms of that. And then as the narrative of the unfolding of American history is that generations rise up and they say, no, we're way off the democratic ideal and we're going to put it back on. That's what abolition was. That's what women's suffrage was. That's what civil rights movement was. That's what people standing up at Standing Rock is. That's what the marriage equality movement is. It's where generations rise up because we started from the very beginning. The signers of the Declaration of Independence, on one hand, they were risking their of aristocracy that heard and that has ever been the core foundational principles of a nation. But among those 54, 56 of them, 41 of them were slave owners. So that's our DNA. That polarity, that juxtaposition has always been with us from the beginning. We are, on one hand, we aspire to the most enlightened principles of equality and justice for all that have ever been core values, and at the same time, we have often been the most violent perpetrators of transgression against our own principles. 'Twas always thus. Our generation is going through what others before us have. This is just the latest iteration of economic tyranny. It's not new. This stuff's been around before. We're not the first generation to have to deal with it. Let's just not be the first one to wimp out on doing what it takes to put this country back on track.
But when you go to those automakers, when you go to the fossil fuel producers, like Roosevelt went to the automakers,
yes,
the forces aligned with them will say what Jeff just said, that this is going
to
put people out of work.
Okay. No. This is the deal. We need those same people. And that's why you need, I believe, a president. And I'm not saying I would be the only one who would do this, because I think that all would care. We make, whether you call it a just transition, whether you call it cap and adapt, it is the same skill. It is the same skill set. It is the same research and development. It is the same manufacturing skill. It is the same engineering skill. That's just a canard. You're going to put these people out of work. No, we're not. We are going to adapt. We are going to repurpose. Listen, we must move from a war economy to a peace economy. We must move from a dirty economy to a clean economy. We will either do it wisely or we will do it painfully. These are our only two choices. If we do not choose to do it wisely, it will be thrust upon us. And my concern, and it is a deep concern, is when it comes to climate, when you think about the social collapse that is is heading our way, if we do not deal with climate reversal in terms of mass starvation, in terms of food shortages, economic collapse, social collapse, the likes of which we have not even seen in the modern era, if we do not plan for this and navigate through this wisely, we will end up with what are essentially eco-fascist dictators. So this is what I mean by a revolution in consciousness that starts with all of us waking up and recognizing the shift that needs to occur. Now, when you talk about people who just live in survival and they have those jobs, that's another condescending, insidiously patronizing view. No, I have not found in my life, and I've traveled a lot, not only geographically but socioeconomically, there is no socioeconomic group in this country that has a monopoly on morals, nobility, or intelligence. And also, a lot of people who are in survival and don't have time to participate know how that's been part of the way they have been screwed. that they had been kept at survival because that's a way to disempower people and to make sure that they'll be available for cheap labor and that they will not be available for the kind of political activism that is necessary. But once people see the game that is being played, whether it is our collective movement or our individual movement, you change one aha at a time. And once people, and that's why we need a president who's talking to people honestly about what has happened here. A deeper conversation about the level of the corruption. When we have a more honest conversation among ourselves about the level of the corruption, it's like when the doctor says, the test results came back and they're not good. What I've seen in people, because my career has been spent, well, people don't come to me usually because things are going well. So I've been with people over and over and over again who just got bad news. But what I have seen when people go through terrible news is that so many unimportant preoccupations fall away in the first 5 minutes. And people become their most noble and their most intelligent. And that's what the American people will do too. If we have a president who's real honest, this is how bad it is. This is how corrupt it's been. This has been going on for 40 years. It's going to have to be a massive movement of change. Otherwise, we could lose our democracy. Otherwise, we could lose what matters most in life. Then the American people are smart. The American people will rise up. We need a president who can, I think, talk with people on the level of the kind of almost emotional and psychological processing we have to go through, the kind of moral persuasion that is necessary, and then we will do what we always do. We kick ass and get the job done.
All right. Go ahead.
Good afternoon, Ms. Williamson. Thank you for taking my question. My name is Emily Berry, and I'm a student from the University of Maryland College Park. I'm studying government and politics and economics. So you say that in your environmental crisis plan that you want the United States to stop all use of nuclear energy. What do you identify as the problems with nuclear energy, and what do you say to those who think it simply gets a bad reputation?
What was the last thing you said? What do I say to those who what?
What are your issues with nuclear energy?
Well, I know Germany had said at one point, we're just going no nuclear. But then when they said no nuclear, there was a problem because they had a hard time keeping up with the other standards that they agreed to. What is wrong with that? If something goes wrong with nuclear energy, I don't think people have really stopped to take in the horror. See, we need an integrated politics. We need to go beyond hard data. We need to go beyond just thinking about the facts. I want you to think about this with your hearts. Something goes wrong there. What are we even talking about? How can we even consider it? And so what? Maybe we'd all be a little warmer, a little cool. I mean, Americans, we have to decide. That's the problem I have with nuclear.
Have you thought enough about how we deal with the end of fossil fuel and how we replace that energy? Are you convinced that the science is there and that we're...
Absolutely, and I'm convinced that the people are there. I'm convinced that we can have, when I've talked about the idea of national service, yes, of course, there's so much that we can do, and we can have high-speed trains, and we can have wind, and we can have solar, and we can have all the powers of the earth, and we can liberate the consciousness of the American people. Of course we can. We have started thinking small. Americans aren't built for thinking small.
So the issue is, how do you make that transition? Because you have said that it is condescending to suggest that people won't figure this out when presented with the facts, but you just mentioned high-speed rail. It was presented as part of the stimulus package to Florida, and they rejected it. Well, Americans have rejected it. There are a lot of Americans who believe it's a UN plot to get people out of their cars.
Okay.
So it's not entirely condescending to suggest that there are some people who don't want to look at the facts.
Okay, so this is what I mean by a revolution. It has to be the people. It has to be the people. It's the same thing what you're saying in South Carolina when they had a $1 billion surplus, and the governor at the time, Nikki Haley, refused the Medicaid expansion, and you've got millions of traumatized children. So I understand that, but you also look at how many people in this country do not vote. So who, once again, fool me once, your fault, fool me twice, it's me. This is why this has to be a conversation and an energy arising among the people. And we have to realize how many people do not vote because they feel it doesn't matter, and in too many cases, they're right. So they have been turned off to the political system because they feel it's rigged. The problem is in how many ways they're right. That's the problem. So that's why the revolution has got to be in the consciousness of the people, and we've got to have political leadership that no longer tells kind of sort of truth all the time, because people can smell it. And I feel a lot of the people who didn't vote, even in this last presidential election, however dysfunctional you and I might agree that it is to express your rebellion by not voting, even though we're like, no, that's not the way you express your rebellion, I understand psychologically where some people are coming from, where they felt, for me to even vote, I know that you're just going to screw me, so I'm not going to participate. That's why we need political leadership who is laying it down, telling the truth, the whole truth, unless we do some radical truth-telling. Not just some truth, real truth, including how corrupt it is, which is not going to be done by politicians who are so part of that system that there's a risk to them in doing so.
How many of you will be qualified to vote in the next election? Keep your hands up if you're planning to vote in the next election. All right, no hands went down. Excellent.
And you know what? I want to say something else about that. In this next election, there will be there will be millions of Americans, and this is the first time. There will be millions of Americans in this next election voting who were not even born in the 20th century. They don't look at the world from this old, obsolete Newtonian way where you simply tweak the pieces of the machine. It's a much more integrative approach to life. It has much more a realization of where people feel, what people are thinking, what the moral forces are. It's far more holistic and integrative. That's why we can start over. We can't start over trying to apply the formulas of the 20th century. This is a 21st century problem. The stakes of failure, when we were arguing about the Vietnam War, the risk was not global catastrophe. When you're looking at something like Iran today, or you're looking at something like climate crisis, you're talking about if this goes wrong, human civilization goes down. And I believe that the kind of thinking that is needed to even hold that is the thinking of the 21st century, and I think the people who, if not born in the 21st century, at least will live the majority of your lives in the 21st century, are prepared to hold our problems with that conceptualization and come up with the solutions that are appropriate because of it.
Sir.
Hey, Marianne, I just want to start by saying I love you, and I think your energy is filled with light.
What did he say?
He said, I love you, and I think your energy is filled with light.
Anyway.
I love you too. Thank you.
All right. My name is Aniga. I'm a sophomore in the SFS studying political economy here at Georgetown. We need to make the world more aware of the impact of positive energy or love in people's lives. For sub-Saharan Africa, which has experienced more frequent and intense climate extremes over the past decades, the ramifications of the world's warming by more than 1.5 degrees Celsius would be profound. This will lead to disaster in Africa in the form of greater droughts, more heat waves, and potential crop failures. How can we create a conscious, collective effort for Africa, a region so often overlooked, and combat this climate fascism?
All right, how do you create, he was talking about the increase, the damage that would take place, particularly in Africa, with a 1.5 degree Celsius increase. How do we create a consciousness in particular of that problem and the damage that will be done in Africa by climate change?
Well, I think that's everything that we're talking about here. The UN report said we're talking about 500 million people. I mean, and I've mentioned already mass starvation. Part of the problem with the United States is that part of this amoral economic system, one of the reasons it's been able to succeed the way it has, is that it knows that the American people, we're good people, we're decent people. I believe that about us. And I think that we're not better than other people, but we're as good as anyone else. So this is the issue. So the way the system plays itself is it knows if people see suffering, they care. So keep the system giving people what they want for the quality of life that they want, and whatever suffering has results, make it sure it's on the other side of town where they don't drive, or on the other side of the world where they don't go, and where their media is probably not showing it because their media is more now about entertainment than anything else. And that's why it's a revolution of conscience. It's a revolution of consciousness. I mean, we're at Georgetown, okay? Most of you are doing fine, but most of you. also know what's going on in Africa. And I assume the very fact that you're here, you care about what's going on in Africa. And this is the deal. If there's karma, if there's cause and effect for an individual, there is for a nation too. That's why Thomas Jefferson said, "I tremble for my country when I consider God as just, and that his justice shall not sleep forever." There is no public issue that will not one day make it to your private door. That's why I say to people all the time, good luck with all that green juice. Good luck with all that gluten-free. Because they're selling that pesticide, they're selling Roundup, it's going to get to your kids. There are contaminants in the water. So what this gentleman is talking about with what is happening in sub-Saharan Africa and the mass starvation, you think right now, look at what's happening with the refugees. Look at what's happening with the refugees that are coming to Europe. Look at what happened with refugees even from the Bahamas recently and the ships that are capsizing. If we don't have the mass mobilization that I'm talking about here, the refugee crises that we're seeing now, we're already at something like 60 million, the greatest refugee humanitarian crisis since World War II. That is small compared to what we are going to have. We are going to have dictators building walls. You think right now you have the president building a wall to make sure that immigrants don't come in because of his skewed view of everything? We will have leaders of countries building walls so that people just can't. We will have countries where there will be armies standing on the beach. So that people can't, and those people will have left places. There will be so many hot places on the earth that are uninhabitable. That's what this gentleman is talking about. He's talking about people who will be leaving because it's not habitable. There's no way to, or because there is no way to grow food there. So they're going to get in boats and try to go somewhere, and they're going to try to land places where armies are going to be shooting at them. We must not let this happen. And we're Americans. And we should be leading the charge of reversing this, reversing it quickly, reversing it now, and reversing it in our own way joyfully, because we're human beings.
This gentleman recognized your energy and the idea that you really think that's important, that energy has a lot of power. However, and I enjoy our conversations, but you did, I just got back from the Bahamas and saw the damage of that hurricane. You had a very unusual tweet about Hurricane Dorian saying that the power of the mind, 2 minutes of prayer, visualization, meditation, you seem to imply that good energy can offset bad hurricanes.
No, I didn't. The only problem there is that I deleted that tweet.
Okay.
I'm Jewish. I go to the doctor.
Okay.
There's nothing anti-doctor about me. There's nothing anti-science about me.
It sort of felt a little anti-science-y, but...
Let me tell you something. A few days before I wrote that tweet, I was in South Carolina and Georgia. You think they weren't praying for that thing to turn around? And are we going to just talk down to them because you think that everybody who prays in those southern states and we're praying, dear God, turn this hurricane around, you think they're stupid? That's real smart strategy, Democratic leftists. That's real smart strategy. Mock and make fun of everybody who believes that God is powerful. I am a woman who believes in God. It doesn't mean I don't believe in science. It doesn't mean I lost some brain cells. It doesn't mean I'm less intelligent.
So you'd have been happier to undelete that tweet. You'd rather
it just live. You know why I deleted it?
Why?
Because Joyce Carol Oates criticized it. And I'm such a fan of Joyce Carol Oates. I've read all her books, and I just went into them and said, oh no! And it's so stupid to delete a tweet when you're in the public eye, because all that means is it's going to get more attention. As soon as I deleted it, I went, oh no!
Marianne Williamson, I am always appreciative of your time. We are appreciative of your time. Big round of applause. We'll be back in 15 minutes with Bernie Sanders. Stick around, and if you have to go to the bathroom, don't lose your passes.